The Galactic Combat Arena buzzed with anticipation. Its massive crystalline dome packed with over 50,000 spectators from 17 different star systems. The air crackled with electricity, both literal and metaphorical, as beings of every conceivable shape and size craned their necks, tentacles, and optical sensors toward the fighting pit below. Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted sentient life forms. The announcer's voice boomed through the arena's Neuralink speakers, bypassing language barriers entirely. Tonight we witness history. The undefeated champion, Krex the Bone Crusher, faces his most unusual challenger yet. A ripple of laughter echoed through the crowd. Unusual was certainly one word for it. Sitting in the challenger's preparation chamber was a creature so unassuming, so pathetically ordinary, that betting stations had stopped taking wagers against him. The odds were literally incalculable. His name was Jake Morrison, though the arena's promotional materials had dubbed him the pink softing from Terra. He stood barely 6 feet tall, possessed no visible armor plating, no razor-sharp claws, no venomous sacs or acid glands. His skin was a pale pink color that suggested he'd never seen real combat, and his hair was an unremarkable brown that flopped lazily across his forehead. "Look at him," chuckled Vorth, a 7-foot-tall reptilian from Sigma Draconis, nudging his companion with one of his forearms. "He doesn't even have proper scales. How does he expect to survive Krex's death grip?" His friend, a gelatinous blob named Kulex, rippled with amusement. "Maybe he plans to bore Krex to death? I heard humans are excellent at talking incessantly about nothing." Jake sat quietly in his corner, methodically wrapping his hands with simple white cloth. No high-tech battle armor, no neural enhancement drugs, no genetic modifications. Just cloth. The sight was so absurd that even the medical drones hovering nearby seemed to shake their sensors in disbelief. "Attention, challenger," a mechanical voice announced through his chamber's intercom. "Final preparations complete. Arena entry in T-minus 60 seconds. Jake stood up slowly, rolling his shoulders with casual indifference. "Showtime," he muttered to himself, though his voice carried none of the bravado typical of arena fighters. If anything, he sounded bored. Meanwhile, across the arena, Krex the Bone Crusher was putting on quite the performance. Standing 12 feet tall and weighing over 800 pounds of pure muscle and chitin, the insectoid warrior was a sight to behold. His mandibles clicked rhythmically as he performed his traditional pre-battle ritual, which involved crushing progressively larger metal objects with his bare hands. "Krex hungry!" he bellowed in broken galactic standard, pulverizing what appeared to be a steel support beam. "KREX want crunchy pink snack." The crowd roared its approval. Krex had been undefeated for 7 cycles, with 43 victories and 0 defeats. His fighting style was simple but devastatingly effective. Grab opponent, squeeze until internal organs became external organs, repeat as necessary. No fighter had lasted longer than 90 seconds against him. The arena floor began to rise, mechanical platforms lifting both fighters toward the main combat zone. As Jake emerged into blazing arena lights, the crowd's roar died down to confused murmurs. "Is that really him?" Someone whispered loudly enough to be heard over the ambient noise. "He looks even smaller than in the promotional images. I heard humans don't even have exoskeletons. How is he still alive?" Jake walked calmly to his corner of the fighting pit, seemingly oblivious to the thousands of eyes, sensors, and other optical organs focused on him. He bounced lightly on the balls of his feet, a motion so casual it looked more like nervous fidgeting than combat preparation. Krex, meanwhile, made his entrance with all the subtlety of a meteor impact. Each step sent vibrations through the arena floor as he stomped toward the center of the pit, arms raised high, mandibles spread wide in a gesture of dominance that had intimidated countless opponents. The crowd was on its feet now, screaming and cheering, and making whatever noise their species was capable of producing. The energy was infectious, electric, primal. "Final checks complete." The announcer's voice cut through the chaos. "Fighters, approach the center line." Jake strolled over with his hands in his pockets, looking for all the world like he was heading to a casual lunch appointment rather than mortal combat. Krex stalked forward with predatory grace, his forearms flexing menacingly, compound eyes fixed on his prey. They stood facing each other across the painted line, the size difference almost comical. Jake barely came up to Krex's chest plates. Little pink thing. Krex rumbled in his approximation of galactic standard, leaning down until his massive head was inches from Jake's face. KREX will make death quick. Is mercy. Jake looked up at the towering insectoid with an expression of mild interest, as if Krex had just commented on the weather. That's very thoughtful of you, he replied in perfect, unaccented galactic standard. I appreciate the consideration. The crowd fell silent. Something about the human's tone was off. There was no fear, no bravado, no anger, just a calm, almost clinical detachment that didn't belong in a combat arena. However, Jake continued, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden hush, I should probably mention something before we start. What pink things say. Krex's mandibles clicked impatiently. Jake's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Something cold and calculating that made several spectators in the front rows unconsciously lean back in their seats. I'm not actually a rookie, he said softly. The statement hung in the air like a poison cloud. Confused murmurs rippled through the audience. What mean not rookie? Krex demanded, though for the first time, his voice carried a note of uncertainty. Jake's lips curved into something that might have been called a smile, if smiles were supposed to make observers question their life choices. I mean, he said, still in that same conversational tone, that I've been fighting professionally for 12 years. I mean that I hold advanced certifications in 17 different combat disciplines. I mean that before I came here, I was a heavyweight champion of the Soul System Defense Corps for 6 consecutive years. The arena was dead silent now. Even the mechanical systems seemed to have stopped humming. I also mean, Jake continued, flexing his fingers experimentally, that your species killed my little sister during a Proxima raid 3 years ago. And there it was, the piece of information that changed everything. The crowd's confusion shifted to something approaching dread as the implication sank in. Krex took an involuntary step backward, his earlier confidence evaporating like morning mist. Regulations say no revenge matches, he protested, but his voice had lost its commanding boom. Oh, this is a revenge match, Jake assured him, his tone still perfectly pleasant. This is just a coincidence. A happy coincidence. The referee, a floating sphere covered in sensors, hovered nervously between them. Challenger Morrison, are you declaring this a grudge match? Arena regulations require full disclosure of. Not at all, Jake interrupted smoothly. I'm here for the prize money, same as everyone else. The fact that I get to demonstrate proper human hospitality to a member of the species that murder my family is just a delightful bonus. Wait, Krex said, backing up another step. Maybe we talk first. Maybe make deal. Jake's smile widened, and somehow that made it infinitely more terrifying. Oh, we're way past talking, big guy. Way past. Fighters ready, the announcer called, though his artificial voice cracked slightly. Combat begins in 3, 2, 1. The starting bell rang out across the arena, its clear tone cutting through the stunned silence like a blade. For a heartbeat, neither fighter moved. Krex stood frozen in place, all 4 arms spread wide in a defensive posture, compound eyes darting left and right as if looking for an escape route that didn't exist. Jake remained perfectly still, hands at his sides, that pleasant smile still playing across his features. You know what the funny thing is? Jake said, his voice carrying easily across the pit despite the thousands of spectators. Your people always claimed humans were weak because we don't have natural weapons. No claws, no fangs, no armor plating. He took a single step forward, and Krex flinched as if struck. But see, that's where you made your mistake. Jake continued, his tone growing more conversational with each word. You assume that because we don't have natural weapons, we can't be dangerous. Another step. Krex's mandibles were clicking frantically now, a sound of pure panic that a species made when faced with imminent death. What you fail to understand, Jake said, still approaching with that same casual, unhurried pace, is that humans don't have natural weapons because we don't need them. Stay back. Krex roared, but his voice cracked on the words. KREX warned Pink Thing. KREX dangerous. Jake paused, tilting his head slightly as if considering this seriously. You know what? You're absolutely right. You are dangerous. You could probably tear me apart without breaking a sweat if you could catch me, if you could hit me, if you had any idea what you were actually fighting. What mean? Krex demanded, though he was still backing away. I mean, Jake replied, and for the first time, his voice carried a hint of something darker. That while you've been crushing opponents who fight like you, I've been studying how to kill things that are bigger, stronger, and meaner than I am. Impossible. Humans weak. No, Jake corrected gently. Humans are adaptable. There's a difference. And then he moved. What happened next will be debated in combat schools across the galaxy for decades to come. Jake didn't charge or leap or make any of the dramatic attacks that arena crowds expected. Instead, he simply flowed forward like water, his movement so smooth and economical that they barely registered as motion. Krex swung down with all four arms, a devastating attack that could have pulped a battle tank. Jake wasn't there. He had shifted slightly to the left, barely a foot, but it was enough. The massive fist whistled harmlessly past his shoulder. Before Krex could recover, Jake stepped forward and did something that defied several laws of physics and at least one law of common sense. He jumped, not a normal jump, but a perfectly timed, mechanically precise leap that carried him up and forward, using Krex's own extended arm as a launching platform. For a split second, he was airborne, level with the giant insectoid's head. Krex had time for exactly one thought. Oh no! Jake's right hand, still wrapped in that simple white cloth, struck Krex's temple with surgical precision. It wasn't a punch, exactly. It was more like a focused transfer of kinetic energy, delivered with the mathematical perfection of someone who understood exactly how much force was required to disrupt the electrical impulses in an insectoid nervous system. The effect was immediate and devastating. Krex's compound eyes went blank. His massive frame swayed for a moment, for arms hanging limply at his sides, before toppling backward like a felled tree. The arena floor shook when he hit. Jake landed lightly on his feet, barely disturbing the dust, and calmly began unwrapping the cloth from his hands. He looked down at Krex's unconscious form with the same mild interest he'd shown throughout the encounter. The arena was dead silent for a full 10 seconds. Then, slowly, the implications of what they had just witnessed began to sink in. The undefeated champion had been defeated in less than 5 seconds. By a human, a species that most of the galaxy considered barely above primitive. Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted sentient life forms. The announcer's voice finally managed, though it sounded strangled. We have a new champion. The crowd exploded. 3 days later, Jake Morrison sat in the most exclusive restaurant on Nexus Station, methodically cutting his synthetic steak, while ignoring the whispered conversations at nearby tables. Word of his victory had spread to the galactic networks faster than a quantum pulse transmission, and suddenly everyone wanted to know everything about the harmless human who had embarrassed the arena's greatest champion. "Excuse me, sir." A timid voice interrupted his meal. Jake looked up to see a young Zelenite female, her blue-scaled skin shimmering nervously under the restaurant's ambient lighting. She held a data pad clutched against her chest like a shield. "Tasha Velk, Galactic Sports Network," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Would it be possible to ask you a few questions about your fight with Krex?" Jake gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Please sit. Order something. The nerf steaks here are surprisingly good." Tasha slid into the chair with obvious reluctance, as if she expected him to suddenly sprout claws and attack. "Thank you. I have to admit, you're not what I expected." "Let me guess," Jake said, taking another bite. "You expected me to be taller? More muscular? Maybe breathing fire and bench-pressing Star Destroyers?" Despite her nervousness, Tasha smiled. "Something like that, yes. The footage of your fight has been analyzed by combat experts across 17 systems. They're calling it impossible." "Which part? The fact that I won, or the fact that I didn't immediately challenge the nearest dreadnought to single combat?" "Both, actually. But mostly they're trying to understand how you moved the way you did. The slow-motion replays show that you somehow predicted Krex's attack pattern perfectly." Jake set down his fork and leaned back in his chair. "That's the thing about being underestimated, Miss Velk. People assume that because you look harmless, you haven't been paying attention." "What do you mean?" I mean, I spent 6 months studying every piece of combat footage featuring Krex that I could find. I analyzed his fighting style, his reaction times, his favorite combinations. By the time I stepped into that arena, I knew exactly what he was going to do before he did it. Tasha's eyes widened. You studied him for 6 months? But you only registered as a challenger 3 weeks ago. Jake's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. I've been planning this fight for 3 years, Miss Velk, ever since I received word that Krex had participated in the Proxima raid. The raid where my sister died, yes. Jake's voice remained perfectly level, but the temperature in the immediate vicinity seemed to drop several degrees. Along with 3,000 other colonists who were guilty of nothing more than trying to build a life on the frontier. Tasha swallowed hard. I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you, but I didn't come here for sympathy. I came here to prove a point. Which was... Jake smiled, and once again, Tasha found herself involuntarily leaning away from the table. That humans are not as harmless as we appear. Before Tasha could respond, a commotion near the restaurant's entrance caught their attention. A group of what appeared to be off-duty arena security officers had entered, their conversation loud enough to carry across the dining room. I'm telling you, it was a fluke. One of them was saying, a massive Coronian whose purple carapace gleamed under the lights. No way a soft skin like that could take Krex in a fair fight. The recordings don't lie, Vex. Another replied, this one a crystalline being whose body chimed softly as he moved. The human dropped him with one hit. One lucky hit, Vex corrected. Give me 5 minutes alone with this Morrison character, and I'll show everyone what happens when humans face real warriors. Jake sighed and stood up, dropping his napkin on the table. Excuse me for a moment, Miss Velk. I need to address something. Wait, Tasha called after him. But he was already walking across the restaurant with that same casual, unhurried pace that had carried him to victory in the arena. Gentlemen, Jake said pleasantly as he approached their table, I couldn't help but overhear your conversation. The security officers turned to look at him, and recognition dawned on their faces, like a sunrise on a toxic planet. Well, Vex rumbled, rising to his full 8-foot height. The famous Jake Morrison. Tell me, human, do you always eavesdrop on private conversations? Only when they concern me directly, Jake replied, his tone remaining conversational. I understand you have some doubts about my victory over Krex. Doubts? Vex laughed, a sound like grinding metal. I know it was a fluke. Krex was overconfident, probably drunk on victory pheromones. Any real warrior would have crushed you like the insignificant insect you are. Interesting theory, Jake mused. Would you like to test it? The restaurant fell silent. Every conversation stopped mid-sentence as diners turned to stare at the unfolding confrontation. Vex's mandibles clicked with amusement. Are you challenging me, soft-skin? Not officially, Jake said. I'm just offering you the opportunity to prove your hypothesis. Unless you prefer to keep your warrior reputation safely theoretical. The insult hit home. Vex's carapace darkened with rage, and his 3 companions moved to flank Jake's position. You want to do this here? In front of all these witnesses. Why not? Jake shrugged. It's not like it'll take very long. You arrogant little... Vex started forward, but one of the companions caught his arm. Wait, Vex. Think about this. If you hurt him here, in a civilian establishment, you'll lose your security clearance. Vex paused, his small eyes glittering with malice. You're right, Gent, but there are other ways to settle this. He turned back to Jake with a predatory grin. The arena has practice facilities, private rooms where security officers can work out their differences with troublemakers. No cameras, no witnesses, no regulations. Sounds perfect. Jake agreed immediately when... Now! Even better. 20 minutes later, Jake found himself in Sub-Level 7 of the arena complex, standing in a circular room with padded walls and a single overhead light. The space was designed for hand-to-hand combat training, with sensors that monitored vital signs but recorded no video. Vex had brought his 3 companions, ostensibly as referees, though their eager expression suggested they were hoping for something more entertaining than a fair fight. Last chance to back out, human, Vex said as he stripped off his uniform jacket, revealing arms thick as tree trunks. I've been fighting professionally for 20 years. I won't go easy on you just because you got lucky once. Jake was performing his now familiar ritual of wrapping his hands with simple cloth. 20 years is impressive. How many of those fights were against humans? None. Your species rarely produces warriors worth facing. Ah, Jake nodded thoughtfully. So you have no experience fighting opponents who use adaptive tactics instead of brute force. Tactics are for the weak. Real warriors rely on strength and skill. Interesting philosophy. Tell me, in those 20 years of professional fighting, how many opponents have you faced who were specifically trained to kill members of your species? Vex paused in his warm-up routine. What kind of question is that? A relevant one, Jake replied, finishing with his hand wraps. You see, after Proxima, the Soul Defense Corps initiated a new training program. We called it the Xenocide Prevention Project. The goal was to ensure that no human soldier would ever again find themselves helpless against alien attackers. So, Jake's smile was back, and Vex found himself taking an involuntary step backward. So I spent 2 years learning exactly how to kill Coronians. Your anatomy, your reflexes, your instinctive fighting patterns. Everything. That's impossible. Coronian physiology is classified information. Was classified, Jake corrected, right up until Coronian General Namethek decided to live-stream the execution of human prisoners during the Proxima raid. After that, your government's cooperation became much less voluntary. The room fell silent except for the hum of the ventilation system. Vex companions had stopped their casual banter and were staring at Jake with newfound wariness. You're bluffing, Vex said, but his voice lacked conviction. Am I? Jake began to circle the room's perimeter, his movements loose and relaxed. Did you know that Coronians have a pressure point located exactly 3 inches below the base of your primary breathing spiracle? Or that your nervous system has a fatal flaw that makes you vulnerable to precisely applied kinetic disruption? Vex was backing away now, his earlier bravado evaporating like water in a vacuum. You can't know that. It's anatomically impossible for a human to... To what? Jake interrupted. To learn? To adapt? To remember that you killed my baby sister? The last words were spoken in the same conversational tone, but they hit the room like a physical blow. Vex companions were edging toward the exit now, suddenly very interested in being somewhere else. Look, Vex said, his voice cracking slightly. Maybe we can work something out. I didn't know about your sister. The Proxima raid wasn't my idea. Oh, I know that, Jake assured him. You weren't important enough to be included in the planning. You were just a grunt who followed orders. But you were there, weren't you, Vex? Your service record shows you were part of the Proxima occupation force. How do you know my service record? The same way I know that you personally supervised the demolition of the children's hospital in Sector 7. The same way I know that you laughed when the building came down. Vex carapace had gone completely pale now, a sure sign of Coronian panic response. That was war. Those were legitimate military targets. My sister was 6 years old, Vex. She was in that hospital because she had a genetic condition that required regular treatment. Tell me, what kind of military threat does a 6-year-old with chronic anemia pose to the mighty Coronian Empire? We were following orders, rules of engagement. Your people were harboring terrorists. Jake stopped circling and stood perfectly still in the center of the room. Do you want to know what her last words were, Vex? I don't. She asked me why the mean bug people were hurting everyone. She wanted to know if I was coming to save her. The room was dead silent now. Even the ventilation system seemed to have stopped humming. I told her I was on my way, Jake continued, his voice still perfectly calm. I told her to hide and wait for Big Brother to come get her. But I was 3 star systems away, fighting a holding action against your fleet. By the time I got to Proxima, there was nothing left but radiation and rubble. Look, I'm sorry about... No, Jake cut him off. You're not sorry about what you did. You're sorry about what's going to happen to you. And then Jake moved. Unlike his fight with Krex, there were no witnesses to record what happened next. The room's sensors registered a brief spike in kinetic energy, followed by the sound of a large object hitting the padded wall. When the emergency medical team arrived 3 minutes later, they found Vex unconscious with what appeared to be a severe case of nervous system shock. Jake was nowhere to be found. The official report stated that Vex had suffered an unfortunate training accident while sparring with an unknown opponent. His 3 companions claimed they had been in the hallway and saw nothing. The room's sensors had mysteriously malfunctioned at the crucial moment. Vex survived, but he never spoke publicly about what had happened in that room. When pressed by investigators, he would only say that humans were far more dangerous than anyone imagined. 6 months later, Jake Morrison quietly retired from professional combat and returned to Earth. He bought a small farm in what used to be Nebraska and spent his days growing vegetables and maintaining a memorial garden dedicated to the victims of Proxima. But throughout the galaxy, his legend grew. The story of the harmless human who had defeated 2 seasoned warriors in a matter of seconds became the stuff of cautionary tales told in military academies and combat schools across 17 star systems. And whenever young aliens asked their elders why humans were granted such wide berths in diplomatic negotiations, the answer was always the same: because they look harmless. And that's exactly what makes them so terrifying.